But this is our sixth database seminar, Charm Database Seminar. And I think this series is coming to a close. We'll probably do some other things. But we've had 6 sessions, and today I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about writing. Not an interesting topic, not quite central to science, but well, maybe it is central to science because as anyone will, if they haven't discovered yet, they will soon discover that you depend entirely for your support and your contribution to science on writing good proposals and writing good scientific articles. And they have to be clear and understandable. And I have had a lot of experience writing grant proposals. Maybe it's my favorite, or maybe it's not my favorite, certainly my most used literary format, the grant proposal. Not the essay, not the poetry, not the poem, not the drama, the grant proposal. So it is worth thinking about issues in writing, and that's why I'm coming to you to talk a little bit about this. Now, let's see if this allows me to go next slide. Yes, I think it will, hopefully. Oops. Unfortunately. Oh, it's well, maybe here. All right. So now, speaking of writing, we are planning a writing retreat in the spring, and there will be an announcement. Gina's planning it with the help of many others. We have seen that at least one other Echo Center in California, the Kaiser Center, has done this and very successfully. An opportunity for us to spend a couple of days together, just pulling our ideas together, writing, and multiple teams coming in with their ideas. The precise format we're not yet sure of, but look forward to it next spring. So let me first talk about two very important principles that precede everything. You have to have these in mind. And this is something not everybody understands. Your text must be clear to an educated layperson. Now, that sounds counterintuitive. You have all these scientific experts on the panel. No, it's really important to write as if you were writing for someone who really was not expert in the field. The reason for that is manifold. First of all, you write more clearly if you do that. Secondly, you avoid assuming knowledge. And thirdly, and most importantly, your study section is composed of lots of people who have different skills. Now, you make the assumption, oh, people reviewing my study must know exactly what I'm talking about. No, do not assume that. That's not true. It's not always true. If you thought that a pediatrician perinatal person would be the first reviewer of a grant on dyspareunia in middle-aged women, dyspareunia means pain on sexual intercourse, you would have identified me in a role I had to take once. And I was not allowed to say, I don't know anything about this field to the study. So you're our reproductive epidemiologist. You got to do this, panel. So just imagine the range of scientific skills. Don't assume anything about the scientific skill of the people reading your proposal. Write it as if they were just intelligent people who did not know your field. You have to explain everything to them. The second point, and I can't say this often enough, all writing is rewriting. I think this is probably, you guys are not so much like this, but I see a lot of young people who think if they've edited their text once or twice, that's it. Oh my God, the number of drafts we used to go through on grant proposals is innumerable. You will have to rewrite, you'll have to condense, you'll have to re-examine each sentence, each word. So the first draft is not enough. Now, I'm going to focus on 5 issues that I think are issues in writing. I list them here. I'll explain them in a moment. Clarity, tone, expertise, wordiness, and grammar. In some ways, this is kind of a hierarchy of importance. Clarity is by far the most important thing, and I'll explain what I mean in the next slide. What clarity means is it easy for the reviewer to understand exactly what you're saying? When I say exactly, if you leave things a little bit ambiguous, I'll elaborate on each of these points. You allow the reviewer to imagine what you're saying rather than understand what you're saying. And if the person reading cannot understand what you're saying, they will not just say, I don't understand this. They'll likely even go worse. They'll substitute something for something that you didn't mean to say for what you have written. The second item is tone. Do you have the right tone in your writing? Is it appropriate to the reviewer's situation and knowledge? Expertise, and this is very important. Do you convey a sense that you know the field well? This depends a lot on your grasp of the field other than what you're doing yourself. You should have a very good grasp of the background. You should understand precisely where you fit, where this research fits, because you know the field well. Are you very wordy? Do you use many more words than you need? This is a real issue because you have a compressed, you have a word limit in these proposals, a page limit, a word limit, not actually a word limit, but a page limit, and de facto a word limit. So you have to really be very concise in your language, use it carefully, exactly, and try not to waste words. And then probably not too important to emphasize, but still always keep in mind grammar and spelling errors are not very good to have in a proposal. If you use the wrong word, if you use and the reviewer thinks it, because all of these things like tone and grammar and wordiness tend to convey a message to the reviewer. And if you're good in those areas, they will give you a lot of credit. I once saw a proposal. It was about a really a kind of a small corner. It was about prematures and their dental problems. Everybody agreed. It wasn't a terribly important problem, but everybody around the table said, it's a very beautifully written proposal. It's just very commonsensical. We can understand it. Maybe it's not the number one priority for ex-previous, but they supported it because they became one with the readers. So even if the topic wasn't so massively critical, the fact that it was well written made a lot of difference to the study section. So what penalties might you pay? Now, I really want to emphasize this. If you're not very clear and the reviewer gets tired of trying to understand what you're getting at, they sometimes substitute views to you that you do not hold. I have seen that happen on studies. I've seen people write saying they proposed to do, we proposed nothing of the sort. That must have been our mistake because we didn't make it clear enough. Tone is very important. Somehow the way one writes, you can sound condescending, you can sound arrogant, you can sound as though you're magnifying everything puffed up. You don't want to do that. And if you don't show yourself well-grounded in the subject matter, the reviewer may think you're not really qualified to undertake this research. Wordiness, if you overwrite, write too many words, then it gives the impression of bloatedness, of inefficiency. And of course, bad grammar, if you see a lot of grammatical errors, typos, you just say, am I going to trust this guy to do that lab stuff that's very meticulous well if they can't even avoid errors in grammar? Now, in clarity, sorry, there are some obstacles that make things clear is not that easy. And the way you make things clear, first of all, is you have to be every section of your proposal has relationships. And although, as you know, we have chunks of things like innovation, we have significance, but under those, and especially research design, which is the most complex of all the components of an NIH proposal, when you're describing innovation, you may have 3 or 4 things you want to say about innovation. You have to make clear where they fit together. Are you moving, when you've talked about one form of innovation, and you move to another, is that another thing or is it a subset of the first thing? And the very useful thing to have is a route map, which is 1, 1A, 1B, 2, 2A, 2B, those kinds of headings, which are very clearly demarcated. I'm very much in favor of that, either lettering or numbering. Another way people get into problems with clarity is that, and this is taught in all high school English classes that I've ever heard of, you have to have a topic sentence for your paragraph. In other words, the first sentence of your paragraph should tell you roughly where your paragraph is headed. And if you don't have a topic sentence, then it's hard to understand the entire thrust of the paragraph. Sometimes people put the topic sentence at the end, and that's not very good. I'll talk about that more in a moment. Again, a list or a hierarchy, how do ideas fit together? Is this now I'm going to tell you five things that they're five different things, or is two and three part of one actually, and so forth? Those hierarchies you have to have. Linkages, you have to be able to link one sentence to another. I'll show you examples of what I mean in a moment. And the linkages have to be really correct. You have to, when you use the word because, you have to mean because and therefore. Another thing that I've frequently see is argument presented in the wrong order. You have to have a logic to the way you're telling the story of your argument, of your case. And if you don't present it in the right order, you can get into trouble with reviewers. They don't understand it. And then maintaining parallelism, trying to use the same metric repeatedly so as not to confuse reviewers. And I'll show examples of each of these points in just the next few slides. So the relationships are made clear by a route map. That is to say, sections that have headings. If you don't have that, then people have trouble understanding where you're going with your case. And they can lose their sense of where your grant proposal is headed. And this really emphasizes the importance of making an outline before you write, and to number and subnumber the sections of your applications. Have sections and subsections, and so that everybody understands precisely what the relationship of one concept is to another. Again, how do you make sure you have a topic sentence? If you highlight the most important sentence in a paragraph, if you don't highlight the first sentence, you're in trouble. First sentence should be the key summative, this is where I'm going. The rest of the paragraph elaborates upon that topic sentence. Always ask yourself, in every paragraph you write, does the first sentence pretty much tell me where the paragraph is going? Paragraphs are the central organizing feature of any argument, any case, any form of argumentative writing. So I think this is another area where people sometimes bump up against things. An argument is not just a listing of things. It's a complexity. It's bumpy. It's not flat. Arguments, examples, analogies, sub-arguments. And sometimes I read proposals in which these are sort of lists, and really the relationships between the components of the case are not fully understood. And it is a special problem, as I say before, where something is really a subset of some other idea, but it's presented in, it looks like a new idea. Is it really a new idea, or is that just an elaboration of what we said before, or an example? These are the kinds of things you have to be attentive to. Now, linkages between sentences are very important. The connecting words we have in the language are very, very useful. While, because, yet, since, however, but. These are words that help move the flow of an argument forward. And if you have a lot of sentences that are unlinked, it's very hard to work out what's the relationship between one sentence and another. And then, of course, you can make the wrong linkages. Sometimes you really do have to have because and therefore really have to mean something, while, however, must convey an antagonism between phrases. So I've sometimes seen people use however, and then you say, however, why are you using the word however? What you're saying here is pretty much the same as you said just before. So where's the however come in? This puzzles people when they read it. And the last thing you want to do is have the reviewer scratch his head saying, what does this all mean? So another thing, keep in mind, I once gave a talk about this, and I used the same example. And then I found someone from NIH using the same example. Imagine that the reviewer is reading your proposal at 1 in the morning, and it's the 7th proposal he's got at his desk, and he has to make a 6 a.m. flight. Okay, but he's backed up, and he's just, and that is, and I heard an NIH official say almost exactly the same words. The reviewer is a busy person, doesn't have that much time, doesn't have time to waste on a overly wordy, complex, hard to understand proposal. Try to make it as easy as possible for the reviewer to understand where you're going. Now, one thing I've seen also as a problem in grant writing is a disorderly argument. So you don't want to interrupt yourself. You don't want to say something and then move to another area and then come back to the same thing. I actually only recently read a paper. I was sent a paper to review by a journal, and it said blankety blank is now occurring at a rate of such and such and such and such. And the second sentence is, what blank and blank is, we define it as. Now, wait a second. You first define what the thing is you're talking about, and then you tell us about it. Not the other way around. So define things first, explain, give the descriptions of that thing afterwards, the things you want to say about it. A common error is to actually say something that depends on something you're going to tell them later. If understanding something depends on something, you have to give that something before, not after the thing you're saying. Another thing is going back and forth between types of evidence, from very specific to very general and back and forth, or moving back and forth. I've seen this happen. Animal studies, human studies, animal studies again, human studies again. No, put them together. Let's first review the animal studies. Let's now talk about the human studies. Don't kind of go back and forth between different forms of evidence. That is a good way to confuse the reviewer. And I think keep things parallel, especially in numerical things. I'll just give you one simple example. Using the same metric, hypothyroidism occurs once in every 5,000 births. Phenylketonuria has an incidence of 4 per 100,000 births, and 15 cases of MPSU, maple syrup urine disease, are diagnosed in the birth annual in the US. It's not as easy to read more simply, if you just give the same metric. So as an example, once in every 5,000, once in 25,000, once in every 250,000, you get the comparison you're making is much clearer. So think about this. It's an easy mistake to make. Use the same metric as you're making when you make comparisons between items. So I'm going to summarize some more ways to be clear. First, make clear how the ideas fit together in sequence. Follow a route map or an outline. Make sure the ideas fit together hierarchically. And here, sometimes diagrams, pictures. I mean, there are all sorts of various kinds of diagrams we use. Now, of course, directed acyclic graphs are popular, but that's not the only way of showing how things relate to one another. But a diagram with arrows can be helpful, but it has to be explained. It can't be left there and saying, assume the reader gets what all these arrows mean. You have to, whenever you have to make a diagram, you have to explain it very carefully. Make sure you have topic sentences. Make sure ideas are linked to each other and they're linked in the right way. Have things in order, in the right order. You may have many very good ideas, but if they're not in the right order, you're going to lose it. And be consistent in your metrics, or if you need to change a metric, explain why you're doing that. Well, actually, now I'm stopping. So I'm going to move to tone. Is there anybody want to raise a question or a thought about clarity about the topics I've raised before? I cannot see everybody's, so I urge you to just say out loud.
Well, I just want to say good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Shatoya.
Hi. I just want to say that this is really beautiful, and it's bringing me back to I always loved English as a student, and this is bringing me back to those days in New York City schools, because our teachers used to run it just into the ground, like topic sentence, and she would give you a paper with all kinds of red ink on it and give you anxiety over topic sentences. So this is not triggering me in a bad way, but I'm glad she did that, because
Did we go to the same New York City schools, Chitoya? I went to George Washington High School in Upper Manhattan. So
Brooklyn, New York, and then Hempstead, New York.
All right. Go Brooklyn. Okay. Thank you very much for that comment, Toya. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say I agree how incredibly important it is. It's easy to come at it thinking, that stuff from high school, grammar, that's not important anymore. What's really important is the science. And that's not the case. You got to have
Right.
a topic sentence. You got to have a structure. It has to be really, really clear. And couldn't agree more about editing oneself.
Yes.
It's never good the first time around. And the biggest difference, I think, between good writers and less good writers is the number of times they thoughtfully edit themselves.
Can't remember who said it, but I used to have it. Maybe even have it here as a slide. All writing is rewriting.
Yeah,
All writing is rewriting.
yeah, absolutely. And I think F. Scott Fitzgerald was one of the best examples of that. He described himself as a very poor writer, but a good editor.
That's good. That's a great sentence. Yeah, you have to be able to edit your own work. So if I'm channeling the English teachers of your high school or even earlier experience, so good. They're probably wonderful people. Glad to be there. So now the tone, I think when you have the tone you write a proposal with, I think some of the errors are presuming reader knowledge. And I'll give you for don't presume too much on what reader knowledge. Self-praise. Now, this is something that I think a lot of younger people don't quite get. We live in a world of advertising these days, and it seems well, I'll talk about that more. In fact, adjectives have to be used sparingly. Uh, and then another problem with tone is the wrong level of detail. Too much over explanation or under explanation. So, presuming reader knowledge. First of all, you should never use a term without defining the term in the way you use it, unless it's something really, really common. But even sometimes the simplest things need explanation. Uh, if you're going to do a case control study, I would say explain what a case control study is. You know, not everybody knows. You think, oh well, everybody. It's an epidemiology study section. They all know that. No, and so on and so forth. And another thing you have to be careful about is abbreviations. Abbreviations are everywhere these days. Everything seems to be abbreviated. Seems like nothing is really spelled out anymore. But MS is mitral stenosis to a cardiologist, multiple sclerosis to a neurologist, how you talk to a woman, to everybody else. And there's a lovely paper, if you want to look at it, in the Journal of Child Neurology, which has abolished all use of abbreviations. That's actually a journal that does not accept abbreviation. You send in an abbreviation, they'll cross it out, send it back to you. Abbreviobabble, you know, and a very nice article on that if you want to have fun with that. So be very careful about use of it. Absolutely define it first time you use it, or have a little box in which you list the abbreviations and try wherever you can to minimize. I know it saves space, but sometimes I never put abbreviations in things like abstracts of articles or the main. I try to leave them out of the specific aims page. Try, because there you really want people to just absorb everything and not be distracted by the abbreviation. So abbreviations you have to be careful about. Exaggeration and self-praise must be avoided like the plague. Please do not say innovative, dramatic, new, the first, thorough, detailed, striking, words like that. Just supply the information that will give the reviewers reason to use those words. That's the approach. Don't supply those praises yourself. Make it so the reviewer will say, oh, this is dramatic, this is striking, this is whatever it is. I have to give this example. It's a little bit off topic, but it's so much fun. Teilhard de Chardin was a very famous guy in his day. He was a Catholic priest and a scientist both. And he tried to synthesize science and religion in a beautiful way. And he wrote this wonderful book called The Phenomenon of Man, which was a huge bestseller, international bestseller. But Peter Medawar, who was a great scientist, Nobel Prize winner, as a matter of fact, he wrote a review and he said, and you can look at this list, I won't read it all. Teilhard is forever shouting at us. Things are in alphabetical order, astounding, colossal, endless, enormous. And on he goes. And his last sentence, Peter Medawar, this is a very famous review, by the way. When something is described as merely huge, we feel let down. This kind of large, massive language has no place in a scientific proposal. You really got to be careful. And I think don't let don't allow yourself to get a Peter Medawar review. And Mark Twain on adjectives, speaking of adjectives, he says, if you see an adjective, kill it. That's an extreme statement, but Mark Twain was known as a good writer. And what happens with adjectives is that, sometimes you don't really need them. Wrong level of precision or detail. You have to judge how much precision and detail. For example, do not say studies overall find an incidence of 0.393%. That's impossible. Studies overall don't find such a, they find a range, 40 to 50%, whatever you want to say. But also on the other hand, you have to be precise when you're saying Jones study found, Smith found. They're not, you don't want to approximate, they want to give exactly what they found. So you have to know how to balance the level of precision or detail with the sentence you're using, the context of it. Now, wordiness, too many words, a common error, difficult to deal with unless you recognize it. You have to use the right word. You have to be concise. One of the things we tend to do is we frame what we say. We put a frame around it where you don't need the frame. And we also convert verbs to nouns. And that all slows down an argument. Verbs are very important. Verbs are what make a sentence flow. And you try to avoid being vague by using vague words. And I'll show you some examples of what they are. Again, Mark Twain, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. Twain really, you really want the right word, not the almost right word. People say to me, well, this word is good enough. I said, on your table, 3.5 is good enough. Why not put in 4.3? They're close. No, you want the right word. A number, you want the right number and the right word.
Nigel, can I have you go back for just a moment to
Sure.
the example you gave about found when you say the author versus a study found? I'm not sure I followed what you were saying.
Okay. That's coming later, I think. I don't think I've gotten to that yet.
No, you've gotten. It was a couple slides. It was about 2 slides back.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That
That's
one.
yeah, that one. After
Next.
adjectives.
Wait,
Next
The next
slide.
one. This
That
one.
one.
Yes.
And now what do you mean here?
I was asking you if you could explain a little bit more about.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. This is actually, that's an excellent, that's not the point of this slide. I come back to it later, Gwen. This point of the slide is just to have know the right degree of precision to use for any given topic. So if you talk about a group of studies, you can't give a 3-decimal point answer because there's no such thing as all studies find. And if you, on the other hand, if you're talking about a specific study, you should give its exact number. So it's a matter of how precise you need to be when you're talking about something numerically. There is also studies find an issue here, but I'm coming back to that. I didn't mean that to be in this slide, Gwen. You saw it before I did. I'll show you what I mean, and I'll come back to that because I do talk about that. So let's see. So people who write a lot or are very always emphasize conciseness. Strunk and White, this is from Strunk wrote this very famous book called The Elements of Sound. Then later it was rewritten by Strunk with his student White. And that became a bestseller. And it's still, even though it's published in the 1920s, still these books are really quite wonderful, thoughtful things to have in your library to look at every once in a while. So, no, vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph, no unnecessary sentences. And he says, just like a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine, no unnecessary parts. And John Ruskin, a famous writer of the 19th century, said, I'm sorry, something is coming up here that makes me, okay, say all you have to say in the fewest possible words, or your reader will be sure to skip them, and in the plainest possible words, or he will certainly misunderstand them. So I think conciseness and plainness are really, really worthy of looking at. And a young person writing often is tempted to try to sound sophisticated. You're kind of a little unsure of yourself and you say, well, let me use some big words here. Let me show that I know. It's always a trap. Don't fall for that. Just try to write simply, straightforwardly, concisely. So here now we come to Gwen's point. These are actually taken from writings. It is known to be related. How can you say that more concisely? Well, if it's known to be, you can say it's related. If it's known, why do you need to tell you it's known to be? Results of the study show. Do you need to say results of the study? The study shows. Keep it simple. May be able to explain. That's the kind of, you may be able, may explain. You're doubling down on the uncertainty. Think of ways, when you go through your first draft, think of places you can, do I need to say that? These are all excessively wordy phrases. And what these have in common is that they give an excessive frame. Related, known to be. We don't need to know about known to be. Results of the study. Well, what else of the study? May be able to explain. Explains, can explain, may explain. And verbs are a great way to move sentences forward. And we do a lot in science of conversion of verbs to nouns. I'll show you examples. And the excessive framing, I'll show more examples of. And using there is, there are. If you could avoid using there is usually means, sometimes you're forced to use it, but very often it means there's a verb missing. There's some action that you're not describing. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. So what I mean when I take your nouns back into verbs is, why say has an influence on? Why not say influences? Why say includes a comparison of medical outcomes and not say compares medical outcomes? Race is a predictor. Race predicts. Has an inhibitory effect on, inhibits. In other words, we as scientists often like to make nouns when there should be verbs, and the verbs are always concise and moves the sentences along. Has been shown to influence. This is the frame part, the shown to. Well, if it's been shown to, it influences, right? If you've shown, you don't need to emphasize that has been shown to unless you want to talk about how it was shown. You could say, if you're making a comment on the methodology, that's another story, but then you'd have a more elaborate sentence. But if all you want to say is we know that something influences because studies have shown it, just say it influences, and you can always cite the studies. The there is and there are tends to hide a verb. So there is little information on medication error. Would better be said as we lack data. The lack is the verb that's missing is lacking, what we lack. There are a dozen studies regarding birth weight. These dozen studies show the show is not there. And regarding is one of those vague words. So there are tend to hide verbs and tend to slow down an argument. Sometimes the verb has to be in there because sometimes people forget they need to have a verb. Pediatricians are more likely than family practitioners to use all treatment modalities, examine mental health services, medication, educational services. What really each one deserves a different verb. This is where you have to actually be longer, including recommending mental health services and education. And well, this is an example of where the verb is missing from each of these list of things to do because because the pediatrician doesn't use mental health services, he recommends its use and so forth. There are words that connote vagueness. Those, in order to, various, regarding. These are kind of vague words. Those, I really can't stand saying those or these in it. Because half the time I say, those? Which exactly are you? What exactly are you referring to? So try to replace it with, or very often you see those children. Well, maybe you mean children. You don't need to say those. In order to is almost always simply removable. Various and regarding tend to be words that connote vagueness. And you don't want to be thought of as vague. You want to be thought of as exact. We tend sometimes to provide information that really is implicit. So describing a process used to generate the data. This is again the framing problem, unless you have something important to say. So if I removed all these things in yellow, Jones et al. Examined children with mild unilateral and bilateral hearing loss and normal controls and found. Well, you don't need to say what he examined. You just say he found children with mild hearing loss fared worse than normal hearing controls in tests of language comprehension. You don't really need that whole, oh, he went to the clinic and he got some children and he examined them and then he found. Unless you want to comment on the methods. We will hire a research nurse and she will examine all subjects. Well, we don't need to hear about that in this when you make an argument about the hiring process, unless again you want to make a point about it. So I think you will find as you read drafts, you'll see lots of little phrases like that. How would it look if I just got rid of that phrase? We studied the prevalence of hearing loss. Again, these are taken, all these examples are taken from actual grant proposals or things that are written. We studied the prevalence of hearing loss in high-risk students. Why do you have to say we studied it? If you have the result, I presume you studied it. When we compare men sampled for the study to those, well, we find that. All you can say is they're similar. You don't need to give the whole procedure when you're describing a finding. Unless, again, of course, if you try to say something about the procedure, in which case you would isolate that thing and explain why you're talking about the sampling process or the way you study hearing loss. Grammar. This is really getting back to grade school. Sorry about that, Chief. Some common confusions. Comma or not the comma. Now there's a learned debate about this, the Oxford comma, the non-Oxford comma. Basically, commas separate full clauses, i.e., if you have a separate subject and object. So I enjoy eating both strawberries and raspberries has no commas, but I enjoy strawberries, comma, but Joe prefers raspberries, a comma because it's a new subject. A new person has appeared on the scene. So you have a new subject, not just a new object. Adjectives and adverbs, it's not, a few hospitals perform their second stage screening as close as possible. Correct English is it's closely because it's an adverb, not an adjective, as closely as possible. But that is entering into kind of standard English. The adverb is getting lost these days. So I can't emphasize this too much. But be that as it may, they might have some silly sticklers on study section like me. It's and its. Its is used when you want to say that it owns something. No apostrophe. My dog wags its tail. Its owning means no apostrophe. Its is used when you want to abbreviate it is. It's time to party. That takes an apostrophe. I'm not going to give you too much grammar. Please, you'd be astounded to know how many people describe themselves as principal investigator, spelt the way I have it on the top. That means an investigator who has principles, who's, presumably not an amoral person. Principal means first. Like the principal of a school, the first person. Principal means the first investigator. So it's a few things are more embarrassing than calling yourself a principal, PLE, investigator than a principal. But one sees it surprisingly often. So that's it. Talked for more than half an hour. So we'll have a charm writing in retreat in the spring, and we'll kind of go over a lot of these ideas, maybe as we pull things together, do some work on editing together. But let me stop now and really invite comments, thoughts, questions. And as I say, maybe I can put it on full screen so I can see everybody's. Aha. Oops. Now I've lost you all. Oh dear. Participants. Here we go. It's a little bit better. So any thoughts, questions, disagreements?
Thank you for this. Are you going to share these slides with us?
Oh, yes. All the
were very
slides are
helpful.
available.
Yes.
Kylie Bisania will send them to anybody who wants them. as well. And we have a recording made of this. It'll be on the website, the Charm website, Jean. Is that where we put it?
That's right. We'll have the slides and a recording on the Charm website.
Yeah.
So we have the other 5 there already. So this
Yeah.
is the 6th in the series.
Yeah.
We have the other 5 there already. And this will be there probably within a week or so.
So as an exercise, people, I'll just throw out a couple other things. People often say to me, I think I could do better as a writer. How can I get better? And I offer 2 suggestions. One is there is a writing center at Michigan State. Now, some of you are not, but most universities have one where people can go and work with people who are experienced editors who can help with their specific writings. The second thing I really am a strong advocate of is reading good writers, particularly people who write the way we do. That is to say, who try to make a case. A proposal, you're making a case, you're making an argument. And some really good essayists have pulled collections of essays together that are often in the form of an argument. Peter Medawar, who I mentioned before, was a brilliant writer about many things, and his essays are good examples of really good. Sometimes it's called expository writing or argumentative writing, an essay that tries to make a point, which is really what you guys are all trying to do. So if you get any of the writings of Peter Medawar, Medawar, he's in there, he's in the slides somewhere, where he did his critique of Teilhard de Chardin. Another guy who writes beautiful essays in medicine is Lewis Thomas, Lives of a Cell, Thomas. You get one of those out of the library, get one and read an essay before you go to bed. Just get the rhythm of good writing into your head. How they use the language. You'll see at the end of any essay by Lewis Thomas or Peter Medawar, you'll feel convinced by what they told you. They'll have made their case to you because they were very good at that. In a little different way, not quite so much in medical science, because Peter Medawar and Lewis Thomas are both writing it for a biomedical audience, is Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote about biology a great deal. Also beautiful sets of essays. Each of them has many essay collections that you can pick off shelves in all libraries have them because they were very popular writers. So that's a nice thing to do if you say, okay, let me just get one out of the library. The essays are usually 15 to 20 pages. Just read one before you go to bed, and just try to absorb the rhythms of good argumentative writing. So I think that's and also they're fun. It's a lot of fun to read, and they make very good points. Enjoyable.
I have in my hand right now Stephen Jay Gould's The Mismeasure of Man, one of my favorite.
That's such a great book.
Yeah.
I was once, when this book came out, I was in an office in New York, Columbia. 5 people had that book in their hand, walking into the office to read at lunchtime.
But he is an excellent writer. I mean, it's an excellent book. It's an
excellent book. Mismeasure of Man is a bit lengthy. It's a kind of not one of his shorter essays. It's a whole book on a topic.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a good example of good argumentative, right? He pulls together, he marshals the evidence in a beautiful way. He talks about the papers that were written that were trying to develop race theory, measuring the heads of people, all sorts of nonsense. And he pulls it together and he gives his case that was not useful. Yeah, so that is a great book, Gwen. I really recommend it to anyone. The Mismeasure of Man.
Nigel, I put in the chat the link to the Office of Research Innovation Proposal Services.
Oh, lovely.
Anybody can go and arrange an appointment to have their draft reviewed by a grant editor. We'll then schedule a subsequent meeting or 2 with you to go over all of their thoughts. And I can say they're really, really good. This is the group that arranges a lot of the NIH grant writing trainings on campus, but they also provide this editing service, and they also set up writing groups from time to time.
That is really nice. That's developed in recent years. That wasn't present there. Yeah. That's separate from the Writing Center, which is really focused more on graduate students, postdocs, for just any form of writing. But this is great to have. It's good to hear that you hear good things about it. Now, I'm sure that U of M and other institutions that are represented on this have similar programs. I don't know if we can squeeze you in as trauma investigators to MSU. Maybe we can. Don't have to tell them where you're actually appointed if you're not appointed at MSU. But yeah, these can be very, very helpful. They've internalized a lot of the important issues in grant writing. Other thoughts? Comments?
I have to give a very honest comment here. I feel like I am made so much brighter by these series, and I appreciate this. And I
Thank you,
appreciate all the contributions to everyone on the call. And hi, Dr. Andersma.
Hey,
Yeah.
Toya, great to see you as always.
Thank you, Toya. It's really quite wonderful. There are a lot of our people in our study office who are not actually officially academics necessarily are involved in this call. And I love that fact that Caitlin and Kelly and so many and Alexa and Jody and all our good people who are actually collecting data right now are interested in that process of writing the argument, as well as many of you who are investigators yourselves. And I see some names here. People have written many, many grants before. Doug Rudin, you've written many grants before. Andrew, you've been very successful. So probably no new lessons to you guys. But if you want to add, in my experience, Doug or Andrea or Miata or anybody who's kind of been there, done that, please do. Now we have a few minutes if you feel like it. Marie O'Neill, anyone?
Just to interject,
Mary.
I've been, it's going back to your original topic. I've been reading, I recently joined the Planetary Society, and if I didn't have a halo on my head and a C2 fracture, I would have seen the annular eclipse off Easter Island. But I've been reading a lot of what they've been writing. And for example, there's a website called Less Wrong, which kind of gives you a LESSWRRONG. And the title of the article is Beware of Stephen Jay Gould. If you read anything Stephen Jay Gould has ever said about evolutionary biology, I have some bad news for you. In the field of evolutionary biology at large, Gould's reputation is mud, not because he was wrong. Many honest scientists have made honest mistakes. What Gould did was much worse, involving deliberate misrepresentation of science. And there's a number of, you might want to think about Feynman, and some of the other, people who have, I would hate to have somebody write this kind of SHIT about me after I'm dead and can't defend myself. So
I had not heard this, Carrie, and I'm singing the praises of Stephen Jay Gould, who was much praised in his life for sure. I'm going to run that one by the greatest evolutionary biologist I know, Rich Lenski, at MSU, Madeline's husband, who is an extraordinary figure.
Evolutionary biology. In the rush to prove bias in a scientist who erroneously used skull size measures to demonstrate racial differences, the great historian, Stephen, calling him a historian is very different than calling him a scientist, may have succumbed to bias himself. So it's described about Morton.
Sounds like an open debate. Fascinating, Carrie. Thank you for telling me this. I'm going to look into this.
Again, it is amazing how if you use language correctly, you can make things that otherwise might seem, arguable. They appear to be valid because of the beauty of the language.
So maybe we make the case that Gould reading Gould is good because even if you're a terrible grant proposal, you may get funded yet anyway. Following Gould.
Yeah,
That's fascinating. And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned Richard Feynman, the physicist, because his books, I don't know if they're good examples, but his books are just a joy to read. If anybody hasn't read Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, just have fun. I was talking about a scientist who didn't take himself too seriously.
Amen.
Big figure in physics, Richard Feynman, and he also wrote very very intriguing ways about science. Thanks for those insights, Carrie. I'll follow up on that.
I'll throw
Any
in
other
also
Yes,
Siddhartha Mukherjee, author
oh
of
yes,
Emperor of All Maladies
oh
and The
yes,
Gene and Intimate History and Song of the Cell. Just wonderful, wonderful.
yes, Mukherjee, yes, really
Yeah,
good. The Emperor of All Maladies and any number of other things. There's some very good writers who write about science, but I'm thinking of particularly people who are trying to make a case in a short, like an essay format, like in 15
right,
pages, more like a grant proposal. And
right.
there, I think Peter Medawar and Lewis Thomas, I hope, Carrie, their reputations have yet to be tarnished, uh, are really great as exemplars of
Yeah.
scientific writing.
I'll throw in also in terms of just other random thoughts, Nigel, that I've heard, and this may be apocryphal. I hope it's true that one of the very first publications NIH ever came out with about grant writing was a little booklet that they shared many years ago.
Hmm.
The first sentence of which said, "There is no substitute for a good idea."
That's good.
I love that. And I think
Very
along
good.
with all of the attention to how you're writing, in my book, some of the most successful grant writers are those who are most willing to throw their idea out the window and start over rather than starting with an idea and never deviating from it, no matter how difficult it gets to defend it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You have
So,
to learn. You have to learn in science. And
yeah,
in other lectures in this series, I've emphasized the importance of the hypothesis and the idea. The ideation is absolutely central. This is a matter of how you express those ideas. But you are quite right, and you cannot avoid the idea, and you cannot avoid. You have to be critical of your own ideas as well. Now, some people say, this is a delicate point. Do I give if I criticize my own work well enough, do I give the reviewer sufficient rope to hang me with? This is, I was advised, you have to be very cautious here. You have to tread cautiously. You have to be able to make an argument that at the end of the day, you've made the case against what are the problems with what I'm doing, but at the end of the day, this is the right thing to do. Nonetheless, you can point out the difficulties. This is not going to be so easy to accomplish. We may not be able to recruit everybody we want to do, but nonetheless, you still have to come out with the idea that's still worth funding. So you can't overly criticize yourself, so you have not a leg to stand on yet. But the best proposals do have quite an element of critique. They're very realistic about what can be done and what can't be done. Because people will poke holes in your methodology and your approach, and you have to be able to say, this is feasible, or we know this is difficult, but we have some ways around it, and so on and so forth. That's a kind of an aspect of grantsmanship that could get its own lecture, really. How do you auto-critique yourself without hanging yourself? It's an interesting point, Steve. Thank you for bringing it up. Anything else? All right, we have exceeded the hour. Thank you very, very much for attending. I hope you will think of joining our writing workshop in the spring. Stay tuned. You'll get messages about it. All the best, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.